This is GovExec Daily, where we bring you the federal stories that really matter. It's May 6th, 2021. I'm Ross John for today. As with so much during 2020, the Office of Personnel Management's Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey this year was unlike previous years. The COVID-19 crisis delayed the deployment of the survey twice, but OPM finally released the results recently, and the numbers were surprising. Across the federal government, employee engagement increased by 4 points from 2019 to 72 out of 100, while the Global Satisfaction Index jumped from 65 in 2019 to 69 in 2020. OPM Acting Director of Strategy and Innovation, Kimberly Wells, told our guest today that the pandemic period likely contributed to these numbers, as telework and a sense of purpose during a key moment in government were factors in the scores increasing. Dovetailing with Public Service Recognition Week, Wells further told GovExec, quote, "Employees understandably get a sense of self-satisfaction and a job well done in this interesting and challenging time." GovExec senior reporter Erich Wagner covers the workforce for us and has written a few stories recently on the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. After a short break, he and I will discuss the survey as well as other workforce stories he is covering. We'll check in with Erich next on GovExec Daily, sponsored by Salesforce.
We live in an always-on world that creates demands for better experiences and interactions with government at all levels. For the public sector to best deliver on its mission, agencies and their employees need IT systems that provide analytical insights to drive decisions, improve work process effectiveness, and provide the best experience for their constituents. With Salesforce, you can rapidly transform the way you deliver government services through capabilities, solutions, and products that flex and scale to meet every need. Learn more about how Salesforce can help your agency adopt the capabilities you need to improve mission impact at salesforce.com/government.
As with most things during the COVID-19 crisis, the 2020 Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey was different this year than it had been in previous years. It was delayed twice, and the results finally came out recently, showing that federal employees surveyed are more engaged and happier in their jobs. Erich Wagner covers the federal workforce for us here at GovExec. He joins the show now to discuss survey results and other pay and benefit stories that will affect our listeners and federal employees. Welcome back to the program.
Happy to be here.
Since you were last on the show, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey scores came out. Who's up, who's down, and what's the story of the general mindset of federal employees as told by the survey?
Well, despite everything that has gone on over the past year, pretty much everyone is up. The government-wide, they saw the biggest jump in employee engagement and satisfaction in more than a decade. Basically, I think there were only like half a dozen agencies that saw any declines to speak of. Really, we should have some caveats here. The people who administer the FEVS at the Office of Personnel Management have warned against taking too many, big conclusions from the data because of a couple of things going on here. One, they streamlined a lot of the actual questions in the survey to make it a little bit shorter and more concise. And then, and they say that just changing around how the order in which you ask questions in a survey can alter results a little bit, just like how people get teed up for different things. But additionally, the fact that they did have to delay it twice from the springtime when they ordinarily start asking it to the fall, they say that can really impact scores as well. In the fall, for instance, it's review season in the federal government. So, that can tinker with things a little bit. But really, the big takeaways here is that, when faced with a gigantic crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, that can actually improve engagement, apparently, because the federal government is very mission focused, and that crisis is one big mission. Additionally, one of the other things that they found was that there's a ton of literature out there about how working remotely actually improves engagement. And so with a lot of people in the federal government moving to full remote work, full telework, that can boost scores as well. So I think you'll see agencies sort of trying to harness some of the gains over the next couple of years once things start to return to whatever normal ends up being.
I mean, when you talked to Tony Reardon in March, I guess it was, one of the things he said was, as far as telework being a positive for the workforce, he basically said, like, look, across the board, lower level employees, managers, everybody likes it. So the idea that it's just some benefit for the people in the lowest parts of the hierarchy is probably foolish. Yeah, the story. We'll move on to a different story now. About the Social Security Administration, and this is something we've covered on the show a lot. And again, speaking to other people I know who work at SSA, there's been a real disconnect between management and the workforce over the last few years. So, what's the status of the contract negotiations for the union and management right now?
I mean, there's not really much new to report. Unfortunately, as the unions would see it, SSA had been undergoing this internal review of all of its contracts with the various unions, and that was supposed to end on, I think, April 23rd. But by last week, sort of a week afterwards, April 30th, they hadn't really done anything to reopen contracts. The Association of Administrative Law Judges, who represent the ALJs who hear disabilities cases, people trying to get access to Social Security disability, they are still trying to get the agency to agree to withdraw. It's pending contract that is not fully finished or ratified, but it was negotiated during the Trump administration and has a number of very controversial elements imposed by the Federal Service Impasses Panel. The agency says, well, we don't have any preconditions to renegotiating, and we're willing to revisit everything in the contract. But for the union, they really want that not hanging over their head anymore. They don't like. For instance, a different union, AFGE at Social Security, had negotiated a sidebar to restore official time to union reps there, but the sidebar is temporary, and so there are fears because of the deep mistrust between labor and management at the agency that, regardless of who is in charge now, that conceivably management could sort of run out the clock on that temporary agreement and then reimpose these draconian rules. Whether or not that's well founded remains to be seen, but it just speaks to the mistrust that's there.
Speaking of employee groups and sort of the status of labor and management, you have a story this week on our site about Democrats on the Hill again bringing up the plight of TSA employees. They don't really have collective bargaining rights, and they have low starting salaries, and among other things, they're put in sort of the front of the line when it came to the pandemic. So, what are lawmakers saying about TSA employees? What are employee groups saying? And is there any kind of pushback against these lawmakers who want to sort of empower TSA workers?
Sure. So we should do a little bit of explanation here. When TSA was created after 9/11, it was given broad latitude to sort of figure out its own personnel system. It's the screener workforce are not Title V employees like the vast majority of federal workers. They so you know they aren't on the general schedule pay scale. Their pay is largely up to how the TSA's own mini thing, which is very dependent on the TSA administrator. There was talk during the Trump administration of well, I'd like to raise pay for the screeners, but it never really happened. So, they make some of the lowest starting salaries in the federal government. I believe the average starting salary is like $35,000 a year, but it can be as low as $29,000 a year. They also don't have full collective bargaining rights. It's an abridged access to Title V rights on collective bargaining, but they don't have access to official time. There are a number of things they can't grieve over that other federal employees can grieve over. And, they also don't have whistleblower protections or access to the MSPB to appeal adverse personnel actions. So, there's a lot that they don't get that other feds do. And since they have consistently among the lowest morale in the federal government, they have horrible retention issues, which leads to expensive recruitment campaigns to replace workers. Lawmakers, it's a bipartisan bill, but it is not 50-50 bipartisan. It is mostly Democrats. The bill would grant TSA workers access to full Title V. And, I think it passed last year in the House, and it probably is likely to do so again this year. But, some Republicans who are still holding out, while they recognize all of the many issues plaguing TSA and its workforce, they are hesitant because of, sort of long-standing critiques of the general schedule pay scale. That it is antiquated. It was designed for a workforce that was essentially clerks at the time in the mid 20th century. But others would argue that the solution there is to update the general schedule, not to deny these workers who have been, on the front lines in a way that most other federal employees haven't been, because to screen travelers, you can't really do that remotely. Anyways, they would argue these people deserve their rights, and you should fix the other problem as opposed to denying them all of these other benefits that they should have access to.
I always found it wild that TSA has sort of integral part of the infrastructure system of our travel economy, such as it were, and they don't have much in the way of labor rights at all, and it's presumably, and this leads me to our final question, presumably the Biden administration will key in on this in some way, shape, or form, because recently the Biden administration has been talking a huge game with regards to organized labor and had some actions behind it. The Biden administration signed an executive order that encourages collective bargaining, and the White House has thrown its support behind the PRO Act, which kind of streamlines, I guess, organizing for workers. How do you see I know I ask you this every time, but how do you kind of see the Biden administration evolving as far as its grand viewpoints on labor, and what are public sector unions doing and saying about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's still pretty early. I'm gonna probably say that every time until it's no longer this early in a 4-year administration. But I think that most unions are seeing some positive movement. There's a lot that has to be done. New contracts can't be negotiated overnight, and those actual, those sessions where a union team and a management team sit down and actually hash out a 30 or 50 article contract, that's where the rubber really hits the road in a lot of these scenarios. But I think there are more positive signs as time goes on. I spoke with some labor leaders earlier this week, and they are happy with a lot of the things that are going on, but they also mentioned there are, like we were talking about with SSA and the mistrust there, there are pockets where things aren't moving as quickly. The VA earlier this year basically flipped a switch and moved portions of its sort of labor policies back to an Obama administration era contract. But there are still pockets of local VA hospitals and living facilities that where that hasn't trickled down yet. So the federal government is big. It moves very slowly. I think in a lot of respects, people are excited in the labor community, but it takes a lot of work. So
The campaign and I guess administration slogan of "Build Back Better" doesn't have a timeline in it, so it doesn't say "Build Back Better" tomorrow or "Build Back Better" next week. It's a lot of these things, particularly when it comes to labor management relations, it takes a while. So we'll certainly be keeping an eye on it, and I imagine I will keep annoying you with a similar question. But until then, Erich, thanks for being on the show with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to GovExec Daily. Our show is produced by Adam Butler and hosted by me, Ross John Fortune. We want to thank Erich Wagner for joining the program. Our music is the song Signals by Catfish Dancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us any feedback at podcast@govexec.com or hit us up on Twitter @govexec. We'd love to hear from you. Now, stay tuned for a message from our sponsor, Salesforce.
Hello and welcome. I'm Juliette Van Wagenen, editor of branded content for Government Executive Media Group's Studio 2G, and I'm sitting down today with Chris Radich, Vice President of Digital Strategy at Salesforce. Chris is going to share his insights into the growing world of cloud services, why agencies need to plan modernization efforts effectively in order to ensure they can get the most out of their investments, and how Salesforce can play a role in creating robust transformation strategies. Chris, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Let's get right into it. Why is it more important than ever that agencies look at modernizing their legacy IT systems?
Well, you look back in time and there was always this digital dilemma within government. There's a variety of reasons. I studied it in my previous role, wrote a report on the state of federal IT, but it feels different this time. It feels like COVID-19 has really been the number one catalyst that we've ever seen in terms of IT modernization, or even more broadly, digital transformation. And it's an exciting time to be an IT leader, to be a mission leader, because it's allowed for that change to happen more naturally. The challenge across government has always been some of the approvals, some of the compliance, maybe even bureaucracy. And COVID has changed the game from my perspective.
As citizens and employees are both looking for more digital experiences, where should agencies be focusing their energies?
When you think of digital experience, it's such a broad priority. And it has morphed into this human-centered design or customer experience priority. But you really have to narrow the aperture to become effective in driving results here. And the way I would describe it is, you need to focus specifically on customer service and engagement, not just CX and human-centered design. And this includes projects that can be implemented quickly, such as contact centers, single front door portals, and digital engagement channels.
Great. And so how can Salesforce specifically help agencies to enable wholesale enterprise digital transformation and include, tools and services like those that you mentioned?
Well, our whole company's principle at Salesforce has always been to focus 100% of our energy around the customer and to build our digital transformations around that government customer. So whether it's a veteran or a farmer or a state or local resident, the customer is always front and center. And when you do that, you start to really identify it's all about improving services, integrating with legacy systems effectively, and providing ways to make data-driven decisions at all levels. And we're leaders in all three categories in terms of customer engagement center, integration platform, and analytics and BI.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Chris, thank you for joining me. And thank you to everyone listening to our podcast. To learn more, be sure to check out the Salesforce Public Sector Transformation Summit on Tuesday, May 25th. You can register at publicsectorsummit.com/register.